Finally we get some hint that this slimy, conniving, scheming, deceitful piece of garbage might actually be a real human being, this man named Jacob. Let me rehearse some of the story as we've heard it up until now. He fought with his brother Esau even before they were born. He schemed a way to steal Esau's birthright from him, and then he deceived old blind father Isaac into giving it to him instead of to the rightful son. And now, of course, he's running for his life. He's running for his life because Esau wants to kill him. Imagine that. Ostensibly, he's running to Uncle Laban's house, because at Uncle Laban's house you can get a real wife. And Rebecca, his mother, doesn't want him to have one of those trashy Ishmaelite women to be his wife. Wants a real woman for it. So ostensibly, he's going up to Uncle Laban's house, way up in modern-day Turkey, in order to get himself a real wife. But you know why he's running, and I know why he's running. And in every story so far, this low-down, nasty, crooked man, I have to tell you, I'm glad he's not my brother. I'm glad he's not my son. I'm glad he's not my son-in-law. He comes now finally to Haran. In the biblical text it says, to the land of the people of the east. And he starts asking some questions about the people who are there. He comes to the well, and people were gathered around the well, and sure enough, this is Uncle Laban's country, and these are Uncle Laban's servants, and these are Uncle Laban's livestock. And you can almost read between the lines and see the wheel starting to spin. Aha, so maybe I can cook up a scheme, maybe. But then something happens in the story. You heard it happen. Somebody shows up. Her name was Rachel. And all of a sudden, Jacob is almost superhuman in his strength. And if you went back to the bit of the story just before what we heard read, almost superhuman strength. There is this big stone that is put over the well to keep the water in the well clean. Single-handedly, he takes the stone off the well. Single-handedly, he waters all of the sheep so that he can impress Rachel, maybe? So that he can awe Rachel, so that maybe when Rachel goes home and talks to Daddy, she'll say, you should see this man I met at the well today. Maybe so. He does end up at Uncle Laban's house, and they cut a deal. Uncle Laban says, oh, I suppose if you're going to work for me, I ought to pay you. Laban has two daughters. The older daughter's name is Leah, and the text struggles to find something nice to say about her. And even there, if you look at various English Bibles, you will find different descriptions about Leah. The New Revised Standard Version, the version that you heard read this morning, took the nicer track and said of her that she had lovely eyes. But Rachel, wow, she was beautiful. Rachel was graceful. And Jacob said to his uncle, I will serve you 7 years. I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter, Rachel. And now comes the phrase that turns Jacob into a human being. Remember it? So Jacob served for 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him like a few days. Why? Because of the love he had for her. They seemed like just a few days because of the love he had for her. Anybody here know about that? Anybody here? Because of the love. Because of the love, no demand is too great. Because of the love, no mountain is too tall. Because of the love, no river is too wide. No matter what, whatever it takes, and the effort will seem effortless, and the striving will seem simple, and the cost will seem almost too cheap. Because of the love. Because of the love. Even if, maybe for the first time in his life, love made him vulnerable. You see, Uncle Laban is part of Jacob's gene pool. And so Uncle Laban is probably as crafty and crooked and scheming and snake-like as is Jacob. So the story unfolds. The 7 years are finished, and it's time for the promised wedding. And Laban puts on a show. He has this huge party, this huge feast, this huge celebration. And then Daddy takes daughter to the wedding tent where eager husband is waiting. And in the morning, what did Jacob discover? What is this you have done to me? Did I not serve you for Rachel? Why have you deceived me? Leah had been the most beautiful woman in the world, even if Leah had been as charming and as sexy as any other woman, Jacob loved Rachel, and love made the difference. And we who are husbands understand that. Yes, there are many, many, many beautiful women in the world. Yes, there are many, many, many charming and sexy women in the world, but you love this woman. You love this woman, and no other woman can take her place. And so you see, it isn't just merely that Laban hoodwinked Jacob. He did. It isn't merely that Laban gave Jacob a dose of his own medicine. He did. All of that is true. Laban says to him as he comes up with an excuse for all of this, well, you see, in our country this is not done. We don't give the younger woman before the firstborn. You hear an echo of the stunt that Jacob himself pulled against his older brother and against his dad. And then Laban says, well, you have a good honeymoon with Leah, and then I'll give you Rachel for another 7 years' worth of work. And it was so. And it was not the happiest household in the world. Leah knew that Jacob always loved Rachel more. But that phrase keeps rattling around. That phrase rattles around in our head. The phrase that somehow changed Jacob. The phrase that somehow matters. The 7 years seemed like just a few days because of the love. Because of the love. And we understand, you and I. For the sake of love, we will invest huge parts of our time and our energy and our attention, even our money and everything else of value. For the sake of love, we will sacrifice all kinds of things, maybe even everything else. Now, hang on, because we're going to kind of turn a corner here. In Ephesians chapter 5, St. Paul says that marriage and church have a lot in common. He says a lot of other things there that make women bristle especially, and maybe rightly so. But one thing he says for sure that does make sense. Marriage and church have a lot in common. Our ability to be good church folk teaches us something about how to live our marriages, and our marriages teach us something about how to be good church folk. They overlap in interesting kinds of ways. And in both cases, for the sake of love, we will invest. For the sake of love, we will sacrifice. You heard it in today's gospel. Jesus said in the gospel reading, the kingdom of heaven is like, and then he told some little parables. One of them was, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. Now, something's going on here that doesn't happen so much in our culture, so maybe we're not familiar with it. The treasure was buried in that field, was left behind by somebody. That was how people tried to protect their valuables when there was a war or a famine or whatever, and people had to flee off to some foreign place. They would bury their treasure someplace where they hoped that someday they would be able to come back from that distant place and find their treasure that they had left behind buried. And so, if the owner of that treasure, the person who had buried it in the first place, could be located, that treasure still belonged to the rightful owner, the person who had buried it. But if the owner could not be located, maybe the owner was killed in a battle or the famine got so intense that he never could come back or whatever, something happened and the owner could not be located, the owner maybe never got back to reclaim it, then whoever owns the field owns the treasure. That was the law in the day. Whoever owns the field owns the treasure. And so because of the value of that treasure, this man who discovered it in a field owned by somebody else, what did he do? He was eager to sell everything he owned. He was eager because everything he owned, taken all together, was worth less than the treasure he had found in the field. So he sells everything so that he can go and buy the field. Like Jacob's love for Rachel, maybe? Is it worth everything we have? Is it worth everything we are? Our kingdom of heaven. Now, the kingdom of heaven is not like Great Britain or Norway or someplace like that where they still have a geographical ruler called a king or a queen. The kingdom of heaven is not quite like that. The kingdom of heaven is that whole collection of people who live in relationship with God, that whole collection of people who are willing to offer themselves to service to God, who are willing to submit to God's rule and God's way. The kingdom of heaven is a collection of people in relationship with God. And the question the parable asks is God worth everything we've got? Do we love God as much as Jacob loved Rachel? Do we love God as much as we love our mates? Do we love God as much as we love our children? And it's almost the same story, except the characters change a bit. Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. Merchant goes to all of the places where pearls can be found. Maybe he goes to estate sales, and maybe he goes to jewelry stores. And maybe he knows where the divers come up to the shore and bring the pearls that they have captured out of the clams and wherever else they're able to find the pearls down in the bottom of the sea. He goes to all of these places and he looks and he looks and he looks and he buys some pearls here and he buys some pearls there. And suddenly he stumbles across the big one. The one that is finer than anybody has ever seen. That pearl that is perfectly flawless, perfectly and hugely valuable. What did he do? This one pearl is worth more than everything else. And so Jesus said in the story, he went and he sold everything that he had so that he could buy the pearl. What's worth everything to you? What's worth everything? Your marriage, your family, your relationship with God. For the sake of love, what investments will you make? What commitments will you make? How much of your life are you willing to give? How will you respond to the God who seeks in holy love to save all people from aimlessness and from sin? How will you respond to the God who seeks in holy love to share our common lot, to conquer sin and death for us, to welcome us into the realm that has no end? You are love. You are love. How will you